In the summer of 1949, in a small town in Florida, 4 young African-American men found their lives turned upside down overnight. Ernest Thomas, Samuel Shepard, Charles Greenlee, and Walter Irvin were accused of a crime they did not commit, a false allegation of assault that would change the course of their lives forever. In an era marked by systemic racism and deeply entrenched segregation, the wheels of justice were anything but fair. What followed was a harrowing ordeal. Coerced confessions, police violence, and convictions handed down without evidence. These men, who had dreams, families, and futures ahead of them, suddenly faced a world where the law was an instrument of oppression rather than protection. The case became emblematic of the injustices that countless African Americans endured during the Jim Crow era, a time when fear, prejudice, and discrimination shaped every interaction with the legal system. Yet, their story is not only one of suffering, it is also a testament to resilience, courage, and the long struggle for justice. As the decades passed, the Groveland Four, named after the town where this tragedy unfolded, remained symbols of a system that failed them. Families carried the weight of injustice for generations, their voices silenced, their stories overlooked. It took more than 70 years for the truth to be formally recognized. The courts posthumously exonerated them, acknowledging the egregious wrongs committed. While justice came late, it serves as a powerful reminder of the need to confront history honestly and ensure that such injustices are never repeated. In telling this story, we honor the memory of these men and the countless others who endured similar fates. Their lives, their struggles, and their eventual recognition compel us to reflect on the ongoing impact of systemic inequality and the importance of vigilance in protecting human rights. If you want to understand history, learn from it, and ensure that truth prevails, join us in exploring stories that matter. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of these powerful narratives. Together, we can keep history alive, learn its lessons, and inspire change for the future. Even as the Groveland Four faced the cruel machinery of Jim Crow justice, the shadow of systemic racism extended far beyond small towns in Florida, touching every corner of American life, even for those who seemed untouchable in the public eye. Nat King, one of the most celebrated musicians of his era, had conquered the airwaves and the hearts of millions with his velvety voice and chart-topping hits. Yet when he dared to buy a home in an all-white Los Angeles neighborhood, the neighborhood erupted in hostility. Neighbors filed lawsuits to block the purchase, burned hateful symbols on his lawn, and even poisoned his dog, sending a clear message that fame and talent offered no shield against prejudice. Despite the intimidation and threats, Cole stood firm with his family, asserting his right to live wherever he chose and showing a quiet courage that transcended mere survival. He insisted that dignity and belonging could not be bought or negotiated, they had to be claimed, often at great personal cost. Jackie Robinson, who broke baseball's color barrier and became an icon of athletic excellence and resilience, experienced a similar paradox of visibility and vulnerability. While he was cheered by white students at UCLA for his unprecedented achievements, off the field he encountered barriers that no medal, no statistic, and no crowd could erase. From restrictive housing covenants to social exclusion, Robinson's life revealed the insidious ways in which racial discrimination operated, weaving itself into daily routines, civic structures, and the spaces one was allowed to inhabit. The contrast between the adulation he received in public and the discrimination he endured privately underscored a painful truth. Recognition or success in one sphere could not erase the deep-seated prejudices embedded in society at large. And the struggle for equity was not abstract, it was an ongoing, tangible challenge that demanded both courage and strategy. Hattie McDonough's story illuminates another dimension of this struggle, particularly within the entertainment industry. In 1940, she became the first African-American actor to win an Academy Award for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, a historic achievement that should have been an unequivocal triumph. Yet, even as Hollywood celebrated her victory, the barriers she faced were starkly evident. The segregated policies of hotels meant that McDaniel had to accept her award in a separate area, away from her co-stars, and she was often cast in roles that perpetuated the very stereotypes that had long constrained black performers. While her talent was undeniable, McDaniel's career was a continuous negotiation with a system that recognized her abilities yet sought to limit the scope of her presence, confining her to roles defined by subservience and caricature. Even in death, her legacy was marred by injustice. Her Oscar, left to Howard University, went missing, and her wishes to be buried in Hollywood's cemetery were denied due to racial restrictions, forcing her to be interred elsewhere. McDaniel's experiences reveal the contradictions of progress, where individual accomplishments could coexist with systemic oppression, and the cost of breaking barriers often fell not just on one person but reverberated across entire communities seeking representation and acknowledgement. Connecting these narratives to the Groveland Four, it becomes clear that the fight against racial injustice was not confined to a single event or location. It was a nationwide struggle affecting individuals in every arena, from sports to music to law enforcement. The discrimination faced by Cole, Robinson, and McDaniel parallels the structural challenges endured by ordinary African Americans. Limitations on property ownership, vulnerability to violence and intimidation, and a legal and social framework that often ignored or punished black ambition. The patterns of oppression were consistent, whether through formal laws, social customs, or institutional practices. Each story highlights the ways in which black Americans had to navigate a society that was not built to accommodate their dignity, talent, or humanity, requiring resilience, ingenuity, and unwavering perseverance in the face of constant setbacks. Moreover, the experiences of these prominent figures illuminate the psychological toll of living in a society structured around exclusion and prejudice. Fame did not grant immunity. Success did not erase fear. Nat King Cole's nightly walk through a hostile neighborhood, Jackie Robinson's navigation of segregated facilities, and Hattie McDaniel's constrained professional opportunities each demonstrate the endurance required to pursue excellence while simultaneously challenging entrenched inequities. Their stories serve as a mirror reflecting the broader African American experience under Jim Crow, showing how systemic barriers infiltrated every aspect of life and required both collective and individual effort to confront and overcome. These personal narratives provide context for the broader history of racial injustice, illustrating that the consequences of prejudice were not just historical abstractions but daily realities that shape decisions, opportunities, and legacies. Ultimately, the resilience of Nat King Cole, Jackie Robinson, and Hattie McDaniel resonates with the lessons from the Groveland Four. Justice, recognition, and equality are not automatically granted, even in the presence of undeniable talent, evidence, or moral righteousness. Each of these stories underscores the importance of remembering the full spectrum of challenges African Americans faced, recognizing that societal progress is neither linear nor guaranteed, and understanding that the victories achieved often came at tremendous personal cost. By recounting these intertwined experiences, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of the Jim Crow era and its enduring impact, illustrating both the systemic hurdles that had to be overcome and the courage of those who faced them head-on, offering inspiration and insight for generations that follow. even as the struggles of individuals like Nat King Cole, Jackie Robinson, and Hattie McDaniel revealed the personal toll of systemic discrimination. The structural mechanisms that upheld racial inequality were equally pervasive, shaping the very fabric of everyday life for Black Americans across the nation. Housing and education, foundational pillars that influence economic opportunity, social mobility, and community development, were systematically manipulated to enforce segregation and limit Black advancement. In both northern and southern states, racial covenants, legally binding clauses in property deeds, prohibited African Americans from purchasing homes in certain neighborhoods, effectively fencing them out of burgeoning suburban communities, high-quality schools, and prosperous business districts. These covenants were often enforced through intimidation, threats, and legal pressure, creating a climate in which the mere act of seeking a better life could invite retaliation or violence. Families that dared to move into restricted areas frequently found themselves targeted by hostile neighbors, vandalism, and sometimes even bombings, as occurred in California, underscoring that housing discrimination was not merely a legal issue but a daily, tangible reality fraught with danger. Beyond these covenants, real estate practices themselves reinforced segregation in more subtle yet equally effective ways. Realtors, lenders, and municipal planners often collaborated, whether explicitly or implicitly, to guide Black families away from certain neighborhoods and into areas with fewer resources, lower property values, and diminished prospects for wealth accumulation. Redlining maps drawn by federal agencies and private banks labeled predominantly Black neighborhoods as high risk, making mortgages difficult or impossible to obtain. This financial exclusion created cycles of poverty that could persist across generations, as families were denied both the stability of homeownership and the ability to build equity to fund education, business ventures, or other forms of advancement. Even when the Supreme Court began to challenge some of these restrictions, enforcement was inconsistent, and informal practices persisted for decades, ensuring that segregation remained deeply embedded in American cities and suburbs, regardless of legal reforms. Segregated schools were another domain in which the consequences of housing discrimination and restrictive policies manifested with profound social implications. Because school funding was often tied to local property taxes, communities with lower property values, frequently the very neighborhoods designated for Black residents, received fewer resources. Outdated materials and poorly maintained facilities. Students were subjected not only to overcrowded classrooms, but also to curricula that ignored or marginalized their histories and contributions, further entrenching the social barriers they faced. In contrast, predominantly white schools in more affluent neighborhoods enjoyed newer buildings, better trained teachers, and broader opportunities for extracurricular activities. College preparation and networking. This dual system of education perpetuated inequality, ensuring that the children of Black families were systematically disadvantaged, no matter their personal talent or ambition, and highlighting the interconnectivity of housing, law, and education in maintaining systemic barriers. These patterns of segregation and exclusion were not confined to any single city or region, but were mirrored in multiple facets of daily life, from employment opportunities to access to public spaces, healthcare, and recreational facilities. The cumulative impact of these policies created what historians sometimes call structural racism, a framework in which laws, customs, and economic practices work together to maintain disparities over time. For Black Americans, this meant that even as they achieved success in sports, entertainment, or other visible arenas, their broader communities continued to face limitations that constrained collective growth and prosperity. The stories of Nat King Cole buying a home in Hancock Park, Jackie Robinson navigating segregated neighborhoods and schools, and Hattie McDaniel confronting barriers in Hollywood all intersected with the structural realities of housing and educational segregation, showing that personal achievement could not, on its dismantle systemic inequality. The ripple effects of these practices were profound and long-lasting, shaping patterns of wealth, health, and political influence that persist today. Neighborhood segregation directly influenced access to quality education, which in turn affected college admissions, career prospects, and income potential. Economic disparities reinforced political disenfranchisement, as property requirements, local governance structures, and voting restrictions often intersected with residential segregation to limit the influence of Black communities. Even the most talented and determined individuals could find their choices circumscribed by a society structured to favor some while restricting others. A reality that contextualizes the struggles faced by the Groveland Four and countless others, whose lives were similarly constrained by systemic injustice. By tracing the connections between housing, education, and broader social inequality, it becomes clear that the barriers Black Americans faced were neither accidental nor isolated. They were deliberate, intertwined mechanisms designed to perpetuate the status quo, resist integration, and maintain economic and social hierarchies. Understanding this framework allows us to see the resilience and determination required to challenge these systems, whether through individual acts of courage, collective activism, or legal intervention. The experiences of Black families navigating restrictive covenants, pursuing education in underfunded schools, or confronting biased municipal policies reveal the depth of systemic inequality and the extraordinary perseverance required to overcome it. These narratives, when placed alongside the personal struggles of Cole, Robinson, McDaniel, and the Groveland Four, form a cohesive picture of a society in which the fight for justice, equity, and recognition was fought on multiple fronts, each deeply interwoven with the other, and each demanding both courage and endurance from those determined to claim their rightful place in the nation. Hattie McDaniel's life and career serve as both a beacon of achievement and a stark illustration of the entrenched racial barriers that shaped the American entertainment industry for decades. Reflecting the broader struggles faced by Black Americans during and after the Jim Crow era, in 1940, when she became the first African-American actor to win an Academy Award for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, it was a historic moment, yet one fraught with contradictions that exposed the limits of recognition in a segregated society. While the world applauded her talent and celebrated the historic nature of her award, the realities of segregation and discrimination meant that her triumph could not be fully enjoyed on the same terms as her white peers. The Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, where the Oscars ceremony was held, maintained a strict no blacks policy, forcing Daniel to accept her award in a segregated area, far from the tables where her co-stars sat. A vivid reminder that even the highest accolades could not shield her from the prejudices embedded in every corner of society. Her Oscar win was not just a personal milestone, but a public testament to her extraordinary skill, resilience, and ability to captivate audiences in a role that required nuance, warmth, and depth. Yet, Hollywood's systemic biases confined her to a narrow range of roles that perpetuated stereotypes rather than celebrated the full complexity of Black life and culture. She was frequently cast as a domestic worker, servant, or mammy figure, a recurring archetype that reflected the limited imagination of a predominantly white industry, unwilling to envision Black characters outside predefined social roles. These roles, though often performed with exceptional skill, underscored the industry's reluctance to offer Black performers opportunities that could allow them to flourish as actors rather than symbols, entertainers rather than fully realized human beings. Despite her extraordinary talent, Daniel's career became a study in compromise, a constant negotiation with an industry that both depended on and constrained her, where success came hand in hand with typecasting, and visibility coexisted with marginalization. Even outside the immediate realm of her work, Daniel confronted the pervasive inequities of segregation that touched every aspect of her life. Hotels, restaurants, and public spaces often denied her access or relegated her to separate facilities, reminding her constantly that her achievements could not dissolve the color line. While she traveled the country promoting films and participating in tours, she navigated a world that simultaneously celebrated her contributions and refused her basic rights of dignity and inclusion, illustrating the contradictions inherent in a society that professed admiration for talent while systematically denying equal opportunity. Her presence on the silver screen was a triumph of artistry. Yet off-screen, the boundaries imposed by racial prejudice circumscribed her choices, limited her freedom, and shaped her interactions with colleagues, audiences, and the institutions that governed her profession. The legacy of Hattie McDaniel is inseparable from the broader narrative of systemic racism in America, showing how societal structures can elevate individuals while simultaneously constraining them, offering recognition while withholding full equality. The limitations she faced in Hollywood mirrored the struggles encountered by Black Americans in housing, education, employment, and civic life, from the racially restrictive covenants that barred families from living in certain neighborhoods to the underfunded schools that shaped educational trajectories, and the discriminatory practices in employment that restricted career advancement. McDaniel's experiences demonstrate that progress, when unaccompanied by structural change, often comes with caveats, and that personal victories exist within a wider context of ongoing oppression that touches countless lives in both visible and subtle ways. Even the fate of her Oscar after her death reflects the persistence of systemic obstacles, long after the immediate barriers of her career had faded. McDaniel had intended for the award to be left to Howard University, a symbolic gesture that would pass her achievement to the next generation. Yet the Oscar vanished, lost within institutional neglect and societal disregard for the contributions of Black artists. Similarly, her burial wishes were thwarted by racially exclusive cemetery policies, forcing her interment in a less prestigious site and delaying posthumous recognition of her legacy. These obstacles highlight the persistence of structural inequities, showing that even after a lifetime of accomplishments, Black individuals often confront barriers that extend beyond their own careers, reflecting deep-rooted societal biases that cannot be overcome by individual achievement alone. Yet, in the face of these limitations, McDaniel exhibited remarkable agency, resilience, and grace, navigating a world structured against her and asserting her talent and dignity wherever possible. She leveraged her position to open doors for future generations, challenged conventions within the industry, and embodied a quiet yet potent form of resistance that spoke volumes about the tenacity required to succeed in a society designed to marginalize her. Her story resonates not just as a tale of personal triumph or injustice, but as a lens through which to understand the broader dynamics of race, power, and recognition in America, illustrating both the possibilities and constraints faced by Black Americans seeking to claim space, visibility, and respect in every arena of public life. By situating Hattie McDaniel's career within the wider tapestry of African American experiences during the Jim Crow era, from the legal and extralegal oppression faced by ordinary citizens to the professional and social limitations imposed on prominent figures, we gain a richer understanding of how systemic barriers shaped lives, constrained opportunities, and defined the boundaries of progress. Her journey is intertwined with those of Nat King Cole, Jackie Robinson, and even the Groveland Four, revealing a shared struggle against discrimination that manifested in multiple dimensions, both personal and institutional. Madaniel's story is a testament to perseverance and a call to recognize the enduring impact of structural inequities, reminding us that the fight for justice and equity extends far beyond individual achievement, requiring continuous effort to dismantle the systems that continue to constrain opportunities and shape societal expectations. The story of Jim Crow-era disenfranchisement does not end with the formal repeal of overtly racist laws. Rather, it unfolds across decades through a variety of modern mechanisms that continue to shape political power and civic engagement in the United States, illustrating how deeply entrenched systems of control adapt over time to maintain inequality. Even as African Americans gained constitutional protections and civil rights, strategies emerged to limit their influence at the ballot box, effectively extending the logic of Jim Crow into contemporary governance. Felony voting bans, for instance, have historically been implemented in ways that disproportionately affect Black communities, creating a lasting barrier to full political participation. In states like Mississippi, laws dating back to the adoption of the state constitution in 1890 included clauses specifically designed to disenfranchise African Americans, and these restrictions continue to resonate today, as felons convicted of certain crimes remain unable to vote unless granted clemency or legislative intervention. The consequences of these policies ripple through communities, diminishing representation, limiting policy influence, and reinforcing the very social inequalities that civil rights activism sought to dismantle. Gerrymandering represents another tool by which the echoes of Jim Crow persist, demonstrating how electoral boundaries can be manipulated to dilute the political power of Black voters. By redrawing districts to pack or fragment minority populations, lawmakers have historically ensured that the votes of African American communities carry less weight, preserving political control for groups resistant to change. Cases such as the North Carolina congressional district controversies illustrate how extreme partisan gerrymandering can entrench disparities, effectively insulating certain legislative bodies from accountability and perpetuating racial and political inequalities in subtle yet pervasive ways. The interplay between judicial rulings, legislative inertia, and strategic mapping demonstrates the resilience of systems designed to limit minority influence, showing that the legacy of Jim Crow is not simply a matter of outdated statutes, but a living framework that adapts to maintain existing hierarchies. Administrative voter suppression further compounds these inequities, manifesting in practices such as purges of voter rolls, stringent identification requirements, and the reduction of polling locations in predominantly Black neighborhoods. The 2018 gubernatorial race in Georgia between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams provides a stark example of this phenomenon, where systematic purges of tens of thousands of voters, coupled with barriers to registration and access, disproportionately affected African American citizens, shaping the outcome of a closely contested election. Such measures, while framed as neutral or bureaucratic, operate in ways that mirror the intentions and outcomes of Jim Crow laws, subtly restricting participation without invoking the explicit racial language of the past. The cumulative effect is a constrained electorate in which certain voices are muted, and the capacity for marginalized communities to influence policy and governance is persistently undermined. These contemporary mechanisms of disenfranchisement intersect with broader social and economic inequalities, magnifying their impact. Communities already burdened by historical housing segregation, unequal educational opportunities, and limited access to wealth-building resources find their political agency further restricted, reinforcing cycles of disadvantage. The connection between systemic oppression in social structures and barriers to civic participation underscores a central truth. The fight against inequality is not merely symbolic or historical, but requires vigilance against evolving strategies that preserve old hierarchies under new guises. The persistence of voter suppression highlights how the legacies of Jim Crow are encoded not only in overt laws but in the practices, policies, and institutional behaviors that continue to shape power relations in ways that many might not immediately perceive. Moreover, the human cost of these modern adaptations of Jim Crow disenfranchisement is profound, affecting both individual lives and collective community outcomes. When citizens are denied the right to vote, their ability to advocate for equitable education, fair housing, healthcare access, and economic opportunity is curtailed, perpetuating disparities across generations. The Groveland Four, whose tragic story of wrongful accusation and delayed justice exemplifies the personal consequences of systemic, existed within a society where both legal and extralegal mechanisms work to maintain racial hierarchies. And modern voter suppression similarly limits the capacity of communities to defend themselves against inequities. The threads connecting historical oppression to present-day tactics are striking. In each, structures designed to curtail black agency adapt to new contexts, relying on legal, bureaucratic, and strategic ingenuity to achieve ends that remain disturbingly familiar. Understanding the continuity of disenfranchisement requires examining the broader social and political landscape, where progress in civil rights often meets resistance in subtle and persistent forms. Legislative hurdles, court challenges, and advocacy efforts reveal the ongoing struggle to secure full participation, illustrating that democracy is neither static nor guaranteed for all citizens equally. Even when laws change on paper, the persistence of structural barriers demonstrates the work yet to be done, and underscores the importance of vigilance, activism, and accountability in ensuring that historical lessons are not forgotten. From felon disenfranchisement in Mississippi to gerrymandered districts in North Carolina and voter roll purges in Georgia, these contemporary examples serve as reminders that the spirit of Jim Crow, though transformed, continues to influence the distribution of political power and the lived realities of Black Americans. By linking the story of disenfranchisement to the broader narratives of segregation, economic inequality, and systemic discrimination, we gain a comprehensive understanding of how historical injustices persist through adaptation rather than disappearance. The experiences of Hattie McDaniel, Jackie Robinson, Nat King, and the Groveland Four reveal the interconnection between personal achievement and structural barriers, highlighting both the resilience of individuals and the enduring influence of institutional inequities. Modern voter suppression, like the barriers encountered in housing, education, and professional arenas, illustrates that the struggle for equality is ongoing, demanding continued engagement, advocacy, and awareness. Recognizing these patterns is essential for addressing the legacy of Jim Crow not merely as a historical chapter, but as a living challenge, one that requires sustained effort to dismantle the mechanisms that continue to limit participation, representation, and justice for all citizens. The enduring impact of Jim Crow is not merely a historical relic, but a living narrative that continues to influence contemporary discourse and political rhetoric, often in ways that both distort the past and challenge the present. In recent years, statements by public figures such as Congressman Byron Donalds have reignited controversy by suggesting that Black communities were better off during the era of Jim Crow. Remarks that immediately sparked widespread backlash and highlighted the deep sensitivity surrounding historical memory, racial justice, and social equity. Such claims not only ignore the documented systemic violence, economic deprivation, and social marginalization endured by African Americans during the height of Jim Crow, but also misrepresent the lived experiences of those who faced brutality, disenfranchisement, and segregation daily. The remarks exemplify a broader struggle over the interpretation of history, in which the reality of oppression can be reframed to serve political agendas. underscoring the need for vigilance in preserving historical accuracy while fostering informed dialogue about racial justice and civic responsibility. The controversy surrounding these statements is deeply intertwined with the legacy of structural inequities that continue to shape American society. The historical record is replete with examples of how African Americans, regardless of talent, fame, or social standing, faced systemic barriers designed to limit opportunity and maintain white supremacy. Figures like Nat King Cole, Jackie Robinson, and Hattie Mudaniel navigated extraordinary personal and professional achievements while confronting threats, violence, and institutional discrimination that ranged from housing segregation to professional marginalization. Nat King Cole's experience purchasing a home in an all-white Los Angeles neighborhood, only to be met with arson and harassment, illustrates the dangers that accompanied the quest for personal security and community presence. While Jackie Robinson, despite his athletic accomplishments, was denied housing near UCLA and subjected to persistent social barriers that underscored the societal resistance to racial integration. Hattie Mudaniel's Oscar win, celebrated yet overshadowed by a segregated ceremony and limited professional roles, reveals how systemic structures constrained personal achievement, highlighting the pervasive nature of racial barriers across multiple spheres of life. These examples create a historical context that exposes the fallacy of claims suggesting that Black Americans were better off during Jim Crow, revealing a stark contrast between individual talent and societal restriction. Political commentary that invokes nostalgia for Jim Crow-era conditions also reflects a misunderstanding, intentional or otherwise, of the mechanisms of oppression that sustained segregation. The period was characterized not only by explicit legal restrictions but by extralegal threats, cultural policing, and structural exclusion designed to enforce racial hierarchies and limit African American agency. The Groveland Four, falsely accused and subjected to coarse confessions, police violence, and wrongful convictions, exemplify the human toll of systemic racism, demonstrating that personal safety, civil rights, and access to justice were consistently compromised. To suggest that Black communities were somehow better off during this period not only erases the suffering of those who endured these abuses, but also trivializes the enduring consequences of segregation. Disenfranchisement and economic marginalization. Such narratives dangerously sanitize history, overlooking the decades of struggle, activism, and legal reform that followed to challenge injustice and expand civil rights. Moreover, the backlash to these statements underscores the continued importance of racial sensitivity and historical literacy in contemporary political discourse. Statements that mischaracterize oppression can inflame public sentiment, provoke legitimate outrage, and undermine trust in public institutions, particularly when directed toward communities that have historically been marginalized. The response to Congressman Donald's remarks was swift, with congressional leaders, civil rights organizations, and community advocates condemning the misrepresentation and providing historical context to correct the narrative. Public debates about such claims highlight the ongoing tension between political rhetoric, historical accuracy, and social responsibility, reminding society that discussions of race and history require careful engagement and an awareness of lived realities rather than abstract generalizations or partisan framing. The continued misrepresentation of Jim Crow also intersects with contemporary debates over policy, voting rights, and civic participation, demonstrating that the legacy of the era is not confined to textbooks but continues to influence power dynamics and societal expectations. Modern mechanisms such as felony disenfranchisement, gerrymandering, and administrative voter suppression echo the strategies once employed to limit Black political agency. suggesting that claims of historical contentment are not only inaccurate but dangerously misleading when interpreted in light of ongoing structural inequities. By drawing false equivalencies between the systemic oppression of the past and contemporary conditions, rhetoric that glorifies or idealizes Jim Crow-era circumstances risks minimizing the significance of civil rights progress, eroding the public's understanding of historical struggles, and potentially rationalizing persistent disparities in political, economic, and social spheres. The public reaction to these statements also reveals a collective commitment to truth-telling and historical accountability, as communities and advocates mobilize to correct false narratives and ensure that the experiences of African Americans are accurately represented. From educational initiatives to media coverage and grassroots advocacy, responses to claims glorifying Jim Crow reinforce the importance of engaging with history responsibly, acknowledging both the harms inflicted and the resilience demonstrated by Black communities in the face of systemic oppression. The discourse surrounding such remarks encourages deeper reflection on the intersections of history, memory, and social justice, prompting audiences to critically evaluate political narratives and recognize the ongoing work required to dismantle the vestiges of past injustice. Ultimately, the backlash against statements suggesting that Black Americans were better off during Jim Crow highlights not only the enduring sensitivity surrounding historical memory, but also the necessity of connecting past struggles to contemporary realities. It illustrates the ways in which systemic oppression adapts and persists, the human costs of misrepresentation, and the collective responsibility to honor truth while advocating for equity. In linking this controversy to the broader narratives of disenfranchisement, segregation, and cultural marginalization explored through the stories of the Groveland Four, Hattie McDaniel, Nat King, and Jackie Robinson, we recognize that the struggle for justice is ongoing, requiring vigilance, education, and active engagement to ensure that history informs contemporary choices, and that the mistakes and horrors of the past are neither ignored nor repeated. The discussion becomes more than a political dispute. It is a call to action, a reminder that understanding history is essential for building a society committed to fairness, representation, and the meaningful inclusion of all voices. Even decades after the formal dismantling of Jim Crow laws, the shadow of systemic racism continues to shape the everyday lives of African Americans in ways both overt and subtle, influencing education, housing, criminal justice, and political representation with consequences that ripple across generations and communities. The promise of equality enshrined in legislation and constitutional amendments marked an important turning point, but the enduring legacy of discrimination, structural barriers, and social bias has ensured that the journey toward genuine equity remains incomplete. Across the nation, patterns established under segregation persist through policies, institutional practices, and social norms that continue to disadvantage Black Americans, reflecting a reality in which progress exists alongside persistent inequity, illustrating that the end of legal segregation did not equate to the end of racial injustice. Education, often heralded as the great equalizer, still reflects stark disparities that trace their origins to the era of Jim Crow and the long history of racially restrictive covenants and residential segregation. Schools in historically Black neighborhoods frequently face underfunding, overcrowding, and limited access to advanced courses or extracurricular opportunities, creating environments in which students are compelled to navigate obstacles that their peers in predominantly white schools seldom encounter. Segregated housing, once enforced through explicit deeds and real estate covenants, left a mark on the educational landscape, as property taxes largely determine school funding. Neighborhoods denied equitable investment resulted in schools starved of resources, perpetuating cycles of disadvantage. The story of a student today attending a public school in a historically marginalized area is inseparable from the structural forces that shape the neighborhood itself, connecting individual educational experiences to a centuries-long struggle against systemic exclusion and economic disinvestment. Housing remains another arena in which the echoes of Jim Crow-era discrimination continue to resonate. Practices such as redlining, restrictive covenants, and racially biased lending, though outlawed, left deep scars on urban development and wealth accumulation. Generations of black families were denied the opportunity to purchase homes in certain neighborhoods, effectively barring them from building intergenerational wealth and accessing social networks tied to more affluent areas. Even today, disparities in mortgage approvals, property valuations, and neighborhood amenities continue to reflect patterns established during segregation, creating communities that are often isolated from economic opportunity and social mobility. The contrast between historically white neighborhoods with well-maintained infrastructure and historically black neighborhoods facing systemic neglect demonstrates that residential segregation's legacy extends far beyond legal codes. It shapes daily life, influencing who can access quality healthcare, transportation, and safe environments for children to grow and thrive. The criminal justice system further illustrates the lingering impact of structural inequities, where African Americans disproportionately face arrest, harsher sentencing, and higher rates of incarceration. Policies and practices such as stop and frisk, mandatory minimums, and felony disenfranchisement trace their roots to post-Jim Crow strategies aimed at controlling black populations and limiting political agency. The case of Mississippi's enduring felony voting bans exemplifies how mechanisms intended to suppress African American influence continue to operate within legal frameworks, restricting the full participation of citizens in democratic processes even after they have served their sentences. Gerrymandering and administrative voter suppression compound these inequities, echoing the historical efforts to curtail black political power, ensuring that systemic disadvantages remain embedded in both local and national governance structures. These realities highlight that the absence of overt segregation does not equate to freedom from structural barriers, but rather signifies the evolution of oppression into more complex and codified forms. Access to healthcare, economic opportunity, and social services is also shaped by systemic inequities that perpetuate the consequences of historical discrimination. Neighborhoods affected by segregation often suffer from limited access to hospitals, clinics, and healthy food options, contributing to disparities in health outcomes that are measurable across racial lines. Employment practices, whether through subtle bias in hiring or differential access to professional networks, reinforce economic gaps. While social services designed to support vulnerable populations may be implemented in ways that fail to fully address historical and ongoing disadvantage, the cumulative effect of these disparities is a society in which black communities, though legally free from formal Jim Crow statutes, continue to contend with a landscape structured by inherited inequities and ongoing systemic bias. The political sphere similarly reflects the enduring legacy of Jim Crow through modern iterations of voter suppression, gerrymandering, and legislative barriers that disproportionately impact African American citizens. From restrictive voter ID laws to the purging of voter rolls, these mechanisms echo historical strategies designed to limit black influence and maintain political hierarchies. Cases such as the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial election, where administrative actions significantly restricted voter access in communities of color, demonstrate that the struggle for equal representation is far from over. The persistence of these obstacles underscores the reality that political empowerment, though legally guaranteed, is often practically constrained by structural inequalities that trace back to the segregationist policies of the past. The broader cultural and societal context further reinforces the challenges posed by systemic racism. Public narratives, media representation, and social expectations frequently reflect biases that marginalize Black voices, limit opportunities, and shape perceptions in ways that subtly sustain inequality. The cumulative impact of these cultural forces interacts with legal and institutional barriers, creating environments where the promise of equality is undermined by persistent, multi-layered obstacles. By examining education, housing, criminal justice, and political representation together, it becomes clear that systemic racism is not confined to isolated incidents, but operates as a network of interrelated mechanisms that reinforce historical patterns of exclusion and disadvantage. Acknowledging these ongoing disparities is essential for understanding how the legacy of Jim Crow continues to influence contemporary American life. The progress achieved through civil rights legislation, Supreme Court rulings, and grassroots activism has undeniably transformed society. Yet the shadows of past injustices remain, demanding vigilance, accountability, and proactive engagement. Education reform, equitable housing initiatives, criminal justice reform, and policies promoting full political participation are not merely aspirational goals, but necessary steps to address structural inequities that persist across generations. Recognizing that systemic racism continues to operate despite the formal end of segregation allows society to confront uncomfortable truths, honor the resilience of those who endured oppression, and commit to creating a future in which equality is realized not just in law but in lived experience. The struggle to dismantle the enduring structures of inequality is ongoing, and it is a collective responsibility to ensure that the lessons of the past inform the actions of the present, guiding society toward genuine justice, opportunity, and inclusion for all. As we reflect on the long and painful history of Jim Crow and its enduring legacy, it becomes clear that understanding our past is not simply an academic exercise, but a moral imperative that shapes how we engage with the present and imagine the future. The stories of the Groveland Four, falsely accused and brutally persecuted, remind us of the human cost of systemic injustice and the urgent need for accountability. Figures like Nat King Cole, Jackie Robinson, and Hattie Mudderneil illustrate the contradictions of fame and discrimination, showing that even remarkable talent and achievement could not shield African Americans from the harsh realities of segregation and bias. These individual experiences are inseparable from broader social, legal, and political structures, revealing how deeply embedded inequality can persist, subtly influencing opportunities and life trajectories long after laws are officially overturned. The persistence of discriminatory practices in housing, education, and criminal justice demonstrates that systemic oppression is not confined to history books. It continues to shape communities and opportunities today. Racial covenants, redlining, and school segregation have left structural scars that continue to influence economic and social mobility, making clear that true equality requires more than formal legislative changes. Similarly, modern manifestations of disenfranchisement through felony voting bans, gerrymandering, and administrative voter suppression underscore the ways in which historical injustices have evolved, adapting to maintain power hierarchies and limit representation. These examples reveal the ongoing challenge of dismantling entrenched systems that operate both openly and covertly, and they call on all of us to engage critically with the mechanisms of inequality that persist in our society. Equally important is the recognition of how narratives around history continue to influence public perception and policy. Statements by politicians suggesting that black communities were better off during Jim Crow highlight not only historical misrepresentation, but also the deep sensitivities and stakes surrounding racial justice in contemporary America. Mischaracterizations of history can perpetuate misunderstanding, undermine progress, and obscure the lived realities of those who suffered and continue to face systemic barriers. By confronting these narratives directly and ensuring that historical truths are shared and understood, we help prevent the erasure of experiences, honor the struggles of those who came before us, and create a foundation for informed advocacy and civic engagement. The journey toward justice and equality is not simply about rectifying the wrongs of the past, but also about actively shaping a society that recognizes and addresses ongoing inequities. Awareness alone is insufficient. It must be coupled with deliberate and sustained efforts to dismantle the lingering structures of oppression that affect education, healthcare, housing, economic opportunity, and political participation. This requires both systemic reforms and individual action, supporting policies that promote equity, holding institutions accountable, and cultivating inclusive communities where all voices are heard and valued. It also involves education and storytelling, sharing the lived experiences of those affected by historical and contemporary injustice, and ensuring that these narratives inform the collective conscience of society. Importantly, the fight for justice is intergenerational. Lessons from the Jim Crow era and its aftermath provide guidance for how we approach modern challenges, emphasizing vigilance against complacency and the need to challenge inequities wherever they manifest. The Groveland Force posthumous exoneration, the recognition of Hattie McDaniel's contributions despite systemic limitations, and the resilience of black artists, athletes, and professionals against structural bias are testaments to the human spirit's capacity to resist and endure. These stories inspire us not only to acknowledge the depth of historical wrongs, but also to recognize the potential for meaningful change when communities, advocates, and individuals act with purpose and integrity. At the same time, dismantling systemic oppression is not merely a legal or political challenge. It is a cultural and social endeavor. Prejudice and inequity can persist in attitudes, traditions, and practices, often subtly shaping how opportunities are distributed and how communities interact. Confronting these realities requires courage, empathy, and a commitment to justice that extends beyond individual circumstances to embrace collective responsibility. By fostering dialogue, amplifying marginalized voices, and creating spaces where experiences are validated and lessons are shared, society can cultivate understanding, challenge entrenched norms, and ensure that the fight for equality remains active and ongoing. The story of the Jim Crow era, its victims, and its survivors is ultimately a call to action. It is a reminder that the progress achieved through civil rights victories, legislative reform, and grassroots activism is fragile and must be continuously defended. It is a prompt for reflection on our own roles as participants in a society still grappling with inequality, and an encouragement to contribute to systemic change in ways both large and small. The pursuit of justice is continuous, requiring attention to policy, law, culture, and community, and demanding that each generation confront the uncomfortable truths of its time, while striving to create a more equitable future. In closing, let us remember that awareness of historical injustices and commitment to dismantle the lingering structures of oppression are essential for building a society where true equality and justice are not aspirational ideals but lived realities. Every action matters, from advocating for fair policies to educating others about the legacy of Jim Crow and its ongoing impact. By engaging thoughtfully and proactively, we honor the resilience of those who endured oppression, contribute to the creation of a more just society, and ensure that future generations inherit a world in which opportunity and dignity are genuinely accessible to all. Thank you for watching and taking the time to engage with this important history. If this video helped you understand the ongoing impact of systemic inequality, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Your support helps spread awareness, foster meaningful conversation, and continue the work of documenting and confronting the legacies of injustice, so that together we can work toward a more equitable and just future.